There was a time on Android when Genshin Impact completely dominated the scene. Without a doubt, it was one of the best open world RPGs ever released on Android. But of course, a lot of games tried to copy its formula, and nowadays we can say that there are games that are just as interesting. And of course, in this video, I'm going through all of them, so you already know. You just drop a like and let's get into it. If I'm not mistaken, this was one of the first Genshin Impact copies, but in an MMORPG format. Let's talk about Tower of Fantasy. I think that's definitely one of the biggest differences with this game. It brings different characters and an MMORPG feeling where you can actually play with other people. And one interesting thing is that the game didn't have the best launch. It had quite a few bugs and several other problems. However, the game ended up listening a lot to its community, and nowadays it's a completely different game. For example, it no longer has a gacha system, and it also removed many of the pay-to-win elements that players used to complain about. The combat has also improved a lot, so if you played this game when it first launched and didn't like it, just like me, it's definitely worth installing it again to see what it has become, because it's a really massive game. I think the only difference between this game and the famous Genshin Impact is the fact that it doesn't have an open world, but it's still pretty similar. Let's talk about Trials of Mana. Actually, this game is a remake of a very old game, but it was completely remade in 3D and originally released for PC. A lot of people don't know this, but the game eventually got a mobile port a long time ago. The game follows the formula of more traditional Japanese RPGs, but with one big difference. You have 6 protagonists, each with their own perspective on the story. This means you need to finish the game 6 times if you want to understand the entire story. For an old game port, it's really impressive. The game manages to deliver a really good Japanese RPG experience. This is definitely the most different game on our list because it doesn't use anime-style characters. Let's talk about where winds meet. Look, I need to be honest with you, if there's a game that has managed to surpass Genshin Impact, I think this one could definitely be considered one of them. The game takes the whole experience and really improves it in pretty much every way. The game story is much better than the main story. It has really good co-op features. It was designed from the beginning to not be pay to win, and it was never a gacha game. And it's honestly impressive how this game manages to feel almost like the dream game that every mobile player has been asking for. And without a doubt, the most interesting part is that it's available on all platforms, from consoles and PC to Android. Out of all the games on our list, this is the one that really goes head to head with Genshin Impact and truly competes with it on equal ground. Let's talk about Wuthering Waves. To be honest, the game is extremely similar. From its open world and characters to the way you play, and even the character switching, everything is very similar. But I think you could describe this game as a more realistic and also slightly more difficult version. The story is much more mature, it has more interesting characters and a combat system that's really hard not to get addicted to. Usually in Genshin Impact there are only 4 or 5 different gameplay styles, but in this game there are many more with different characters and different ways for you to play as well. It's an impressive game, and a lot of people say that it has already surpassed Genshin Impact. From the same creators of the famous Genshin Impact, this one is like a smaller version of it, but with really good combat. Let's talk about ZENLEZZ Zone Zero. This game is very different, and I think that's exactly how it was meant to be. From its world, which is a little more realistic, to its characters, but of course I think the biggest difference is the combat, since the combat here is much more fluid and much more enjoyable, and it gets pretty close to a hack and slash style. Another thing the game is well known for in the community is the fact that it uses a lot of fan service with its female characters. It's worth mentioning that the other games don't really use any of that, so people can even be surprised when they start playing this one. Considered by many to be an anime GTA, let's talk about a game that looks a lot like Genshin Impact, NTE, NEVERNESS to EVERNESS.
Spot coming. To me. No mercy. Thousand eyes, awaken!
A lot of people got interested in this game because it has a slightly more realistic open world with cars, buildings, cell phones, and several other things. That was enough for people to start calling it the anime GTA. But honestly, it feels much more like a modern Genshin Impact than a GTA. The game's story is pretty cohesive and keeps expanding. There are several characters for you to get to know, and of course there are also several monsters in the middle of the city for you to defeat. The game also has several different types of missions. You can even drive a taxi or simply explore the same map, but honestly I think it's much more of a Genshin Impact than a GTA. This is definitely the best and biggest action RPG on the Play Store, and you need to know about it. Let's talk about Punishing Grey Raven. I can tell you that I absolutely love hack and slash games. I'm almost always playing one on whatever platform I can, and I can say with complete confidence that I've never seen a game like this. This is definitely the game with the best gameplay I've ever seen in my life, and of course the game has many other qualities too. It has a non-predatory gacha system, really interesting characters that are part of the story, and it feels like it was made by people who love playing games for people who love playing games. This game is honestly really impressive, and you need to try it right now, bro. A lot of people end up ignoring this game, but not on this channel. We're going to talk about it too because it's actually a really interesting game. Let's talk about solo leveling. Arise.
Eyes on me! Go away.
If you've already watched the anime, you know exactly how it works because this is also a game. And here it's no different. You have 3 or 4 characters entering portals and of course defeating as many enemies as possible to earn a lot of money. The game is pretty simple when it comes to these systems, but it still delivers some of the best gameplay on this list. The cool part is being able to play with characters that you probably already know and have seen in the anime. And honestly, the only real difference between this game and the famous Genshin Impact is the open world. If it had one, they would be very similar. You know those games that try to copy a famous big game but end up feeling like a smaller and kind of strange version of it? Let's talk about TATAKAI. I played the game, and from the little bit I researched, it seems like the game was made entirely using artificial intelligence. Honestly, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can notice it as soon as you start playing. The game has a lot of similarities to Genshin Impact, from its open world and its somewhat similar characters to even its story, but it's still a game with its own limitations. I think one of the most impressive things about this game is its combat system, which is both an action RPG and a turn-based RPG at the same time. Yes, the combat is very different, and it's one of the craziest things about this game. It's definitely worth giving it a try. A long time ago, a trailer for this game was released, and it was inspired by Genshin Impact. It got everyone really hyped. Let's talk about the 7 Deadly Sins origin. Just like many of the games on our list, this one works much better if you've already watched the anime. It has all the characters and follows a good part of the story from the anime. However, the interesting part is that the game is also great for people who have never watched it, since it tells a good part of the anime story right there in the game. This game tried to copy a lot from Genshin Impact, the open world, exploration, all the different things you can do, the character switching and the elemental system. Pretty much everything is very similar. However, this game has one thing that makes it different, and it's a really good one. It's co-op system. Unlike all the other games on our list, you can even play the story mode in co-op in this game. This is definitely one of the most unknown games on our list, mainly because it's actually an offline and paid game. Let's talk about ASTRIS. From the same creators of ARKNIGHTS ENDFIELD, this time the adventure is completely offline, but it also brings in the open world and a lot of things for you to explore. In the game, you play as 2 characters who are exploring a completely unknown planet and discovering some things about it. The game has a linear story that you need to follow in order to finish the game, but at the same time, it gives you complete freedom to explore the planet however you want. And the game really manages to be good in both aspects, both in its story and its turn-based RPG system, and of course in the exploration of the planet, which is one of its main parts. This is definitely the most well-known game on our list because you could say it's the older brother of Genshin Impact. Let's talk about Honkai Star Rail.
Just a scratch.
Well, this one is actually very similar to Genshin Impact. That's because, of course, it's made by the same company, and if I'm not mistaken, it even uses some characters that are very similar. The only difference with this game is that it's a turn-based RPG, but surprisingly, it might be one of the best turn-based RPGs on the Play Store. The game doesn't have any automatic gameplay. It also has a world for you to explore, and unlike Genshin Impact, this one has a much more cohesive linear story that's really enjoyable to follow. Unlike the others that focus more on an open world exploration and freedom, this one tells a really well-made story. I think it's crazy to imagine that there's a Genshin Impact more focused on women, but yes, it actually exists. Let's talk about Infinity NIKKE. I think that's exactly what makes it completely different from the other games on our list. As you can see, the game was heavily inspired by that open fantasy world with lots of things for you to do, but the goals of this game are different. For example, you can still collect characters in the game, but what really matters are the outfits for your character called looks, which completely change what your character can do and even their abilities. Besides that, the game also has a big focus on simulation, and of course it can also be considered a cozy game. But the most impressive part is that it has a huge open world that you can explore, filled with monsters just like Genshin Impact. Back when the famous Genshin Impact was breaking all kinds of records, Asobimo decided to try releasing its own version as well. Let's talk about METRIA. This company is usually known for making big MMORPGs, but this time they decided to make a game that's kind of similar to Genshin Impact. One really interesting thing is that the story is very similar. You wake up with a character and don't know exactly where you are, and you need to help some other NPCs while slowly discovering who you are. As you can see, it's very similar to Genshin Impact from the character switching to the classes. However, I can tell you that this game is much harder than normal. And the truth is, Genshin Impact is a very easy game when it comes to defeating bosses and doing other things, but this game is completely different from that. This is a really impressive game that unfortunately didn't get much attention. Let's talk about Mongil Star Dive. The game has a really well made story that genuinely managed to keep me interested. It has a fantasy world with monsters that look similar to Pokemon and a chosen character who can actually communicate with all of these monsters and discover what's going on there. I think you could say that the game has a semi-open world since there's quite a lot for you to explore, but overall it works much more like an action RPG. Unlike some of the other games on our list, the combat is much more difficult and there aren't many characters for you to collect. But if there's one thing this game really stands out for, without a doubt, it's the story. The story is really good. If there's one game on our list that I've actually played and genuinely think is better than Genshin Impact, it's definitely this one. Let's talk about ARKNIGHTS, ENDFIELD.
There is no escape.
And honestly, I'm really impressed with what this game has become because it actually started as a tower defense game which later became a hugely successful anime, and now we have this open world game that's making a lot of money. Unlike Genshin Impact, in this game you're basically going to terraform the planet, explore a completely destroyed world and slowly colonize it little by little. Of course there are also several monsters and different races on the planet for you to fight, but this game pays an incredible amount of attention to detail. From the graphical details to the details in the story and characters is definitely one of the games that caught my attention the most out of all of these. Another game inspired by an anime on our list, let's talk about BLEACH, Soul Resonance. BLEACH is a very old anime from the 2000s, but it's one of those anime that left a mark on an entire generation. Recently it ended up getting some new episodes and this game was released to go along with that, so you have the same characters but with a much more updated story, and of course the gameplay is also updated since this is a really high quality action RPG. If you like the anime, this is definitely one of the best games on our list since you'll have all the characters and a good story to follow. However, it does feel quite similar to the other action RPGs on our list. There isn't much that's original about it, but it does the basics really well. This game is really interesting, especially if you like a slightly faster paced combat system. Let's talk about Crystal of Atlan. I think the biggest difference between this game and Genshin Impact is that Crystal of Atlan has a very strong focus on co-op, where you'll be playing with other people most of the time. This is also a game that ended up getting rid of the famous gacha system, and it's another game on our list that removed all of its pay-to-win elements. Unlike the other games here, this one works much more around a dungeon-based system similar to Diablo, but there's one thing the game ended up standing out for, and honestly I don't even think the developers realize it. The game has really good PvP, which honestly none of the other games on our list have. For some people this game is simply a crime, but we're still going to talk about it. This is Devil May Cry peak of combat. A lot of people were waiting for this game to finally release on Android, but when it did, many people ended up disappointed, but not for the right reasons. Yes, just like many of the RPGs on our list, the game ended up launching with a lot of gacha and basically no story, something completely different from the original game. And of course, the main difference between this game and the others on our list is the fact that it doesn't have an open world, but the combat is also pretty similar. And not only that, the game also features several cool characters for you to collect, along with combat that feels a lot like the action RPGs made for mobile nowadays. And honestly, even today, I still don't understand all the hate this game gets. This is definitely one of the most different games on our list because of its gameplay, and of course that makes it very different. Let's talk about Duet Night Abyss. One thing that really surprised me about this game is how similar its story is to Genshin Impact. The story is similar, the characters are similar, and there's even a kind of paymon that follows you around all the time and makes jokes just like in Genshin. But of course the game does have its differences, and one of them is the combat. The game has weapons like swords, spears, and things like that, but it also has firearms. And of course this firearm combat is definitely one of the best parts of the game. Besides that, this is another game that has been listening a lot to its community and has been growing quite a lot over time. It's a game that started off very quietly and nowadays it has already become pretty big. And that's it. These are some of the best games like Genshin Impact you can play on Android. Let me know in the comments which one is your favorite, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next one.